We've all got that one model that we just don't seem to like. We don't think we've done a very good job at it. And for me, that is Raikkonen, the Grimhailer. I painted this as one of my first models, and after a few weeks, it got knocked off the shelf. And anybody that owns the Raikkonen model can attest to the fact that the base is pretty bad. It's pretty thin in areas, so I'm going to go ahead and repaint this and rebuild the base. So it is a push fit model, which in my experience usually leads to a few gaps. So I'm going ahead and pushing everything back together and filling in the seams with some Tamiya extra thin. I then go ahead and remove any of the mold lines that I missed from when I first painted this model. And for this base I decided that I was going to try out some of Ender Toys 3D printed base. Now these are, I believe, PLA printed, so you can actually see the layer lines on the sides, but to me that's not that big a deal, you can always sand it down. Now the bulk of the terrain is going to be made using some cork. You can use a cork coaster and cork floor tile, as well as bulking out the main landform using some XPS foam. Now I'd recommend that you're not like me and you actually use a sharp knife for this. XPS foam can really wear down your blades very easily, and this is quite a dull blade. I should have snapped it off and used a better bit. I have just gone ahead and done a bit of a stencil and cut around the line to make it fit onto this base. And after a little bit of tidying up, it's time to start trying out different layouts to see how best I can utilise this material. So I would always recommend that you trial it out first, don't glue anything down straight away, see how it fits. Once you're happy with it, feel free to glue it down. Probably best using a gel super glue, as using the thinner one gets very quickly absorbed into the cork. Now most of you that know anything about foam and super glue do not mix. So after a little bit more shaving, I decided that I was going to attach these using some cocktail sticks. Press this through the foam and into the cork, and that was more than enough to hold it in place. I think I did about 4 of these. As with everything, you're not really going to get a perfect fit, there are going to be gaps. So any gaps that I found, the main ones, I just pushed more cork in, just to fill it out a little bit before I add my terrain paste. Now I'm just going to snip away any of the protruding cocktail stick, as I don't want this to be visible in the final piece. And once I've finally decided where I'm going to situate the model, I then break out the all-important terrain paste. Now I'm using Diorama Effects ground texture from Vallejo, and I'm just using this sort of like frosting on a cake. So I'm just spreading this around. In my experience, this takes a bit longer to dry than it says on the bottle, but I think I might have done it a bit too thin in some areas, a bit too thick in others. But the main thing that you're going to want to do is cover any of those seams in between the layers. You don't want it to look too stepped like it does a bit here. I did come in with a bit of polyfiller a little bit later, because if you add it too stepped it looks too man-made. You want it to look more natural. So I'm just adding it to the bottom, the lowest part of the base. And as you've seen, I've come in with some sand and some pebbles. That's just going to make it seem a little bit more natural. So I did go ahead and use part of the statue from the original base. Like the original base, not the remake that I didn't like. But I just thought that I'd tie it together, and I also added that little gravestone at the top, and that's just going to help tie in the base with our Nighthorn model. I later came in with some tacky glue that I got from Hobbycraft, and that's just going to be used so that I can sprinkle on some static grass. I'm not using the static grass applicator this time. I tried to use the tweezer technique that I have seen Sergio Calvo use, and to be honest it's worked out quite nice. I primed it black and then primed with Wraithbone, but I didn't quite like it. I changed which direction I was going with it, kept it on the base, went through in the airbrush I think I used Gorthor Brown or Thondia Brown, and I sprayed this in little patches before moving on once again with the airbrush, and I started to spray in some greens, some blues, just to add a bit of variety in that colour. Now originally my plan was to use contrast paints, and I first came in with Black Legion, but when I started to paint this on the model I noticed that it was really patchy, and I think that's because of the colour of the primer that I used. And the more pigment that was used up, the more streaky that it seemed to become. So I realised that this paint job was going to have to become a bit more serious, so I came in with my normal paints, and yeah, let's get painting. I came in again with the airbrush using my Vallejo matte black primer, and I sprayed this onto all the areas that were going to be painted as skin. I then came in with Dark Reaper and Abaddon Black, base coating with pure Abaddon Black, and adding in a little bit more of that Dark Reaper each layer until finishing with a highlight of pure Dark Reaper. Now, you need to be making sure that as you're moving through these layers, you're covering a smaller and smaller area each time. That's what's going to help you lead into that gradient, and it's going to make it look a lot more professional and realistic. Now, I'm sure you've noticed in a lot of professional painters' pieces that the main focus is usually around the face, and for me I wanted that to be the face of the horse, not Raikkonen himself, but it just makes it look a lot more realistic, as the face is the thing in the main light. The further away from the light source that you go, the darker the paint is. So as I'm working through this rib cage, I'm not highlighting up to the same level that I did on the neck and face. Now you're going to see me here painting this cloak green, as originally in my concept the green worked really well, but when I came to it later and it was finished, to me it looked like he was wearing a tent. So I did come in a bit later and paint it red. So the reds that I used were Mephiston Red and Evil Sun Scarlet. I also didn't film something as usual, and that is painting the flames. I did that using my airbrush. You could probably do it dry brushing, and that was using a general base of Xerius purple over all parts of the flames, before I highlighted the origin of each point using Emperor's Children. Like I say, I used an airbrush. You could probably dry brush this. There's probably tutorials on here somewhere. But now I'm going to go ahead and paint all the bone. Not a lot of bone on this model, but you've probably seen me paint bone before in the Korgorath video. But I have actually changed up how I do this. So I actually mixed in the darkest skin colour from the horse, and I mixed that in with Thondia Brown. And I'm going to start highlighting, mixing in a little bit more of that Gorthor Brown. Once again, painting in smaller and smaller areas each time to help with that blend. Like I said earlier, I did actually go a little bit different on this, and I actually mixed in some Kislev flesh, as I wanted to show the aged bone and how it's reacted with the dirt. And I can honestly say I think it turned out better than all the bone on all of the Korgorath, completely. Now, while I have got a little bit of a gap in this script, I just want to know from you guys, what's your favourite material to paint? Like me, do you like painting bone? Do you like painting fabrics, furs, or even metallics? I'm not the biggest fan of metallics, even though I do actually use them on this model. But yeah, let me know in the comments what material you like painting best. And probably even tell me what you like painting least. And back to the painting, I finished up the bone just by tickling the tips with Ushabti bone. Once again, I repeated all these steps on all bone parts of the model, And yeah, I think it turned out quite successful. For the metallics, I originally had my heart set on using silvers, gunmetals, that kind of thing, but I eventually settled on Hashut copper. I watered this down and it took a few coats to get it right, but I'm glad that I thinned it down so you don't get any of them visible brush strokes. Now, it's always going to be an important step when you've been working with metallics to change out your paint water. It might not be that obvious to some people, but if you take a look in your cup, you're going to see all these metallic flakes. So you're going to want to change out your water, and that's going to prevent any cross-contamination with the paints. And I also recommend having a separate paintbrush. As you saw then, I have a paintbrush that is marked with 3 lines, and that tells me that is just for metallics only. Next, I came in with Seraphim Sepia and did a nice warm wash over all the armour pieces. This is going to really help with that contrast, as the rest of it is painted in quite cooler colours. Purples, blues, that kind of thing. So having that contrast is really going to help balance out the piece. Now, I've never come across any undead that is wearing pristine armour. So now we're going to come in with Nihalic Oxide, I think that's how it's pronounced, but it's quite an old paint I think, and it works similar to a wash, and we're just going to put that in all the recesses on the armour. That's just going to help oxidise it and make it look a little bit more realistic. If you feel you've had a little bit too much, you can just use a damp brush to get rid of any of the excess. So for any of the undead flesh, on Reikenor himself, I used Dichala Lilac as my base coat, and I slowly highlighted my way up to Slanesh Grey. And if you want any of this skin to look particularly rotten, you can always go in and do a bit of stippling. That makes it look a little bit more mottled and a little more decayed. So we're coming up towards the end of the video now. I just want to say, if you made it this far, I really appreciate it. Helps get them watch hours up. And yeah, if you think the video was good enough, like, comment, subscribe. If you think it was crap, downvote it, comment. You can still subscribe if you want, that still helps me. But yeah, there's probably going to be another video released in a couple of days that's just going to be more of a time lapse. And that's just going to show me what you prefer, whether you prefer me talking through everything, or perhaps if you just prefer having it in the background, because I know some people just like that. They like having something in the background, whether it be Netflix, could be my videos, could be anything, but it's just something to have in the background while you're painting your own models. So yeah, thank you for watching, and if you like the videos, there's plenty more of them in a bit of the back catalogue. You can always go back, have a look at some of them. Might as well recommend the Croxagore video. Didn't do as well as I thought it would, but yeah, if it didn't hit subscription feeds, have a look. But yeah, just finishing up now, so let's move into the glamour shots. But first, let's take a look at where we started.